As India's influence expands, a quiet consensus is forming among established global powers. They do not want New Delhi emerging as a dominant global player. For decades, Western nations operated under a predictable dynamic. When they set the global agenda, developing nations were largely expected to fall in line. But recently, that dynamic broke. The clearest example came shortly after the conflict in Ukraine began. European leaders explicitly pressured New Delhi to stop purchasing Russian oil, expecting immediate compliance. Instead, the response they got was blunt. Indian officials publicly stated that Europe needs to move past the mindset that its own problems are the world's problems, while the world's problems are ignored. That single exchange confirmed a harsh reality for Western capitals. The era of dictating geopolitical terms to New Delhi was over. This display of independence triggered intense anxiety among Western officials. In Washington, foreign policy circles have openly discussed a specific doctrine regarding New Delhi. They will not make the same mistake with India. That mistake refers to China. Strategists believe their past economic leniency and open trade policies accidentally allowed Beijing to grow into an uncontrollable rival superpower. So the new objective is not to stop India's economy entirely, but to carefully throttle that growth, keeping the country advancing just enough to be useful, but not fast enough to become an independent geopolitical anchor. But that introduces a massive strategic dilemma. How exactly do you artificially suppress the rise of a nuclear-armed democracy of over 1 billion people? Traditional coercion is failing. Trade sanctions or naval posturing are increasingly ineffective against a nation with such a massive domestic market and a credible military deterrent. With direct external pressure yielding fewer results, the strategic focus is shifting toward the only remaining vulnerability, the internal stability of the nation itself. India's National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval, recently delivered a stark public warning. He stated that the country is currently facing severe, calculated challenges from both the outside and the inside. He categorizes these internal challenges under a concept called fourth-generation warfare. This is a modern doctrine that entirely abandons the use of conventional military hardware and direct combat. In this model, the battlefield shifts to civil society. Adversaries deploy covert financial networks and foreign influence to weaponize a nation's own domestic population against itself. By quietly funding domestic activists and amplifying the grievances of specific interest groups, foreign powers can actively fracture the target society from the inside out. The objective here is not to conquer physical territory. The goal is to make the target country so internally divided and chaotic that it becomes incapable of growing its global influence. For India, this tactic is particularly dangerous because of a major structural vulnerability. The country holds a massive Gen Z population, carrying high expectations for job creation and rapid economic progress. As a rapidly developing economy naturally faces bottlenecks and slowdowns, those unmet expectations can translate into genuine frustration, anger, and legitimate domestic friction. Foreign interests do not have to invent these grievances. They simply study them and then strategically hijack this organic youth frustration, supplying the resources needed to amplify standard dissent into highly organized unrest. Once amplified, the intended outcome is widespread physical disruption. These movements are designed to create systemic paralysis, locking up infrastructure and halting the country's economic momentum. A frustrated, deeply divided youth demographic allows adversaries to severely damage India's rise without ever having to declare a formal war. This invisible warfare is happening right as the clock is ticking. India currently sits in a narrow, rare 10 to 15-year geopolitical window of opportunity. The economic and strategic trajectory established during this specific period will dictate India's global standing and its internal prosperity for the next half-century. Recognizing this tight timeline, Doval issued a direct challenge to the domestic audience, pointing out a common misconception of what freedom actually means. He noted that many view liberties simply as the right to do whatever they want, regardless of the consequences. But in a growing nation, true liberty requires immense civic responsibility. Domestic disruptions and protests that disregard the wider national interest directly fuel the foreign strategies designed to keep India in check. Ultimately, India's strongest defense against fourth-generation warfare is not a larger military or an expanded nuclear arsenal. It is a unified, resilient domestic society that simply refuses to be weaponized against its own rise.
If you value clarity over chaos, explore more on Clear Lens X.